This is the Storypunks podcast, a show where we talk about all the punks. So steampunk, dieselpunk, cyberpunk, and all the other punks. I'm your host, Cindy Grigg, starting the new year out with episode 6, interviewing Bruce Bethke, who only coined the term cyberpunk, and which only became the inspiration for all these other punks we talk about on this show. No big deal. But I mean, he really is where these movements started to coalesce around an idea, because he gave it a name when he named his book Cyberpunk, when he created that term. And I really believe that is a major reason why we all enjoy these subgenres today. Bruce is so down to earth, so wonderful to talk to, and he has some new projects coming up. So I know you'll love hearing about that and learning from him and just absorbing his wonderful inspiration, energy, and knowledge. So yes, Happy New Year. It's so wonderful to have you here. And on that note, let's talk goals. I'll quickly share mine with you before the interview. When it comes to New Year's resolutions, well, I tend to be really bad at those once the emotion of the goal has passed. What I'm better at is engineering course corrections or new ruts. For example, the big thing I've been working on over the past couple months was going paperless. For those listening to the podcast, I'm showing my messy desk, my previous desk. And so you can watch that on YouTube, where I have a video of this entire podcast. But yeah, slightly embarrassing to show you this, but this is reality. As you can see, it's me going to the thrift store and cobbling together a bunch of shelves and pieces that I thought were cool, either not necessarily together, completely unstable, probably some kind of hazard to safety of passersby. And all this so that I could use it not as a desk, but as a very ineffective storage unit. And so I would just end up sitting on the floor sometimes, or sitting on my couch, or whatever. I can just be so messy. I've always been super messy. And the only time in my life I wasn't messy was when I was living out of one suitcase for a period of time. And so I can't handle stuff. And I have a really high tolerance for mess. And so it just gets really out of hand. I have to really limit my stuff. And I'm getting better about that, including going paperless. So yeah, I can move forward on this track, hopefully without thinking about it too much. And that's my style of New Year's resolutions. But all of this is just to show you that I've been an extreme case. And I've been really changing how I view messiness, that it's not necessarily a great sign or effect of creativity, but it gets in the way. And it's something that I've just really resisted or just didn't care about, and that I've been pretty effective working around. But I'm really starting to connect with the idea that stuff really does take up our time and it takes over our lives. So I'm interested in not reaching for stuff, not shopping so much, not spending my time returning stuff, not getting into that whole cycle of stuff. And I'm so excited to jump into some of my creative projects with this overarching idea in mind. And I hope that this has given you ideas, or maybe you're not into New Year's resolutions at all, and that's all good too. But if you are someone that nerds out about productivity the way I do, then you may be interested in another project that I am reviving. So I have a project that was on hiatus, pretty much, a site that I've worked on for years called theproductiveauthor.com. And this is a great site for any creative, but I do take it from that viewpoint of an author, and I share what I'm learning because I want to continue my study. So I've revived it, I've reorganized it, and made it more user-friendly as far as anyone that wants to peek in on what I'm learning, because that's pretty much what it is. I want to continue my study of productivity for myself. And I'm writing essays over there and things that have to do with productivity and the creative side of productivity, where it's not at odds with our creativity, because we're obviously creatives. Anyone listening to this podcast is pretty much probably a creative. So kinds of things over at theproductiveauthor.com. So without further ado, let's get into this interview. So in some circles, Bruce Bethke is best known for his genre-naming 1980 short story, Cyberpunk. In others, he's better known for his award-winning 1995 novel, Head Crash, or for one of the dozens of other stories and novels he saw published worldwide over the course of a 30-year writing career. What very few people in either circle have known until recently is that he actually got his start in the music industry as part of the software design team that developed MIDI and the Finale music notation engine, among other things, but now works in supercomputer software development, doing work that is absolutely fascinating to do, but almost impossible to explain to anyone not already fluent in old high Unix and well-grounded in massively parallel processor architectures, Fourier transformations, and computational fluid dynamics. It's pretty awesome, Bruce. Bruce has served on the boards of directors of 3 different arts-related nonprofit corporations, and if given half a chance, will explain at great length why Rampant Loon Media LLC is a for-profit corporation and why Section 501c3 nonprofit corporations are the worst things that ever happened to the arts. Don't give him that chance. For a closer look into the darker corners of Bruce's mind, you can read, and for the audience, I'll link to these in the show notes, but here are those interview titles that you can read. 6 Questions for Bruce Bethke, The Story Behind Stupefying Stories, Strange Horizons interview with Bruce Bethke. But if you really want to know the secret, read How to Become a Writer. This is an editorial on the Friday Challenge. And the Friday Challenge is a feature you'll find on Bruce's stupefyingstories.blogspot.com blog. So once again, Bruce, that is one of my favorite bios that I've read on this show. And I'm just so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Look at those guitars. That looks so good.
Those are my old friends.
Very cool. I'm assuming, do those have names? Have you named them? Pet names?
Pet names? No, not really. This is my baby. This is my Gibson SG Junior that I started with in the good Lord early 70s. See. With the P90 pickups on the bridge, and I took off the twang bar tailpiece because it never stayed in tune, and put on a DiMarzio dual sound up by the neck here with a coil splitter, and of course I had to muck around with the wiring because that's the kind of guy I am. But this is the one that gives me the. I do not have an amplifier here, which is probably good for all concerned, but I can.
Woo! That's the punk.
I'm in my Pete Townsend mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The punk part of Cyberpunk.
Yeah. Let's see. And that's that one there is that's $8 Stella, which is not a reference to an old girlfriend. It's the Harmony Stella guitar that I bought for $8. And every time I move, I tangle up this cable in my microphone, so I should stop it. So are we getting an adequate audio quality on the mic here?
Yes, it sounds really good to me. Now, when I talk, how does it sound to you?
Oh, you're perfect. You're wonderful. So, and that one there is just a plain black Stratocaster because, everybody should always have a plain black Stratocaster. And then a knockoff of a Fender Telecaster, which I got when I was going through my imitation Bruce Springsteen phase, but I fortunately got over that very quickly.
Oh, this is so great. Thank you for letting us peek at what you see every day when you're working in there.
Well, it's and I do not actually keep my Philip K. Dick Award. right in front of my face all the time. And I just put it there to cover that outlet.
Hey, that's the
And let's
perfect.
see. I don't know. Hang on. Let me see if I can get this down without this. This is what I actually look at all day, which is over my desk all the time. And I don't know if there's too much glare. We'll try and hold
You
it.
got it. It's perfect.
Back it off a little bit. This is the artwork that Phil Foglio did for Jimmy Plays Dead. And I'm just trying to. Yeah. Okay.
That looked great. Yes, this is awesome. We'll just jump right into the questions because we have several. And I always start out with this same question. And of course, I'm going to ask it to Bruce Bethke. I am completely nerding out because Bruce Bethke coined the term cyberpunk. And I, of course, want to know his take on defining the term. Everyone in these fields has a different take on it. And so it's really helpful for us to keep hearing each other's definitions, and especially from the person who coined cyberpunk. So what do you consider inbounds and how do you define the term?
I honestly, all I was trying to do was name a story. 37 years ago, good Lord, how did I get to be this old? I was writing a story about a bunch of teenage hackers. That's all they were. They were a bunch of kids. They were doing what kids do, which is they're embracing this new technology and they are learning it faster because they're kids and they're plastic and they absorb things. And they were developing a technical facility with it that their parents and adult authority figures really could only begin to guess at. And they did the same thing that teenagers do with every new technology that comes along, which is they find ways to use it that their parents couldn't imagine and can't control. I mean, when Les Paul invented his solid body electric guitar, he had no idea what kind of racket the kids were going to be making with it a generation later. And in fact, he kept working for decades to try and fix the things that he saw as flaws in the Les Paul guitar that everybody who was out there on stage with him said, wow, this is great, man. It's loud, it's feedback, it's distortion. And, Les Paul kept trying to fix that. So what I was doing when I came up with the term was two things. I was trying to get this, I was into one-word titles at the time. And I was just trying to come up with a word that grokked this interface between teenage punk attitudes and high technology. And I really didn't envision anything further than that. Just that, that at the time I wrote the story, I was looking about 40 years out in the future. And I was thinking, the kids who are going to come along and who are going to use this stuff, who are going to grow up speaking computer, they are going to do incredible things and terrifying things. And what are we going to call them? And that's where I came up with the word.
That makes me like it even more, Bruce, because that's such a cool story. And from that, how does it feel to know that different punk movements have come out of that word, out of that inspiration of relating, the technology and the punk and all that?
It's cool. It's really cool. I had a lot of friends in high school and college who went, wound up having careers in aerospace, and they said that when they got into the field and started actually working in the field, there were a lot of old guys in the field who had grown up reading Heinlein and Clark and Asimov, and they went into aerospace because they wanted to make a reality out of that cool stuff they read about when they were kids. And I work in supercomputer software R&D, and I am continually meeting people who went into computer science because they wanted to read, or they wanted to turn that cool stuff they read about when they were kids into realities as adults. And and so they talk about, it's actually a little embarrassing when you get people doing the "we are not worthy" thing, but it's really cool. Meet people who got inspired by the science fiction that was published in the 80s and are trying to do something with it now. So the other punk movements, that's a literary thing, and I have really never worried about literary movements or literary definitions. That's a job for critics to do after the work of creating the thing is done. And I've always been more interested in creating the thing or creating the next thing. So, I thought, Gibson and Sterling did a brilliant job with the difference engine, and essentially creating steampunk just from the idea that Babbage's, a computation engine actually worked. But
I love that.
the other variants on punk literature, that's kind of, that's cool. It's nice. It's a little sad that, punk is kind of like gate. Every scandal is a gate now. It's, I'm glad it worked. I'm glad it's, given people a marketing label for a lot of things, but on a personal level, I don't really take it to heart. I don't worry about it, I guess is the right way to put it.
Well, I think that says a lot about you as a person and your wonderful outlook, and it really comes through. So thank you. And as someone who is doing a podcast around the punks, I thank you. And I do know there are plenty of people that feel it's gone too far. We're tired of new punks. I'm open to all of it. I just think it's awesome. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay, good. You're welcome.
That fair? Okay, good.
Yes.
So on this note, before we move on, do you have an opinion on the term post-cyberpunk? Because sometimes in the cyberpunk sphere, this comes up. What do you think?
Have we?
Okay, you're back.
Are we back? Are we back? Yeah, because you froze up. You froze up there, and in the audio square wave modulated. But
Awesome.
Sorry. Well, that is my background. I didn't set out to be a writer. I set out to be a musician, and I really don't consider myself. I still don't. I mean, I'm what I am is I'm a musician on a somewhat long, or I'm a musician on a somewhat longer break from paying work than I normally am. It's about 35 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is how I came into the thing, was trying to make this as short as possible. I came in through synthesizers, analog synthesizers, which begat hybrids, which began digital synthesizers. This is the work I did, and this is what introduced me to the punk music scene, and that was kind of what informed what I tried to do as a writer. But
that makes sense. So for anyone who hasn't tried some of your books, will you tell us a little bit about them? Tell us about their themes or whatever you want to focus on. And also, if you could tell us about Stupefying Stories in case some of the audience hasn't heard of this or checked it out.
Well, okay. So I really was a short story writer more than anything else, through early 80s to early 90s. For about a 10-year stretch, I wrote a lot of short stories, and a lot of, cyberpunk was not my only short story. It wasn't my defining story as far as I was concerned. Again, this is one of these things where you should let the critics make the judgment afterwards and just focus on the work. I wrote a lot of different short stories for a lot of different markets, a lot of different magazines. I'm generally, most of them tend to be kind of funny, cyber, techno, near future. I put a lot more humor in than anything else, which is kind of weird or kind of difficult, because readers and publishers especially like to really narrowcast you. They like to hang a label on you, and so I went through a phase where I was writing horror, and I would get this very strange fan mail from people saying, I really struggled to understand the humor in the story, but I just didn't get it. And so,
Nice.
I wrote mysteries for Hitchcock's magazine. I mean, I wrote a pile of stuff. But if you want to make a living in the business, which at one time I did, you have to write novels. And my first novel was one of the Isaac Asimov's Robot City series, and that's basically they invited young writers to come in and play with Asimov's robots and the laws of robotics. And since my sensibility about that was more informed by John Sladek than Isaac Asimov, I had a lot of fun with that novel, and it was great to watch that one get published worldwide and get fan mail from it from all over the world for close to 20 years. Never saw a royalty check from it because, according to the publisher, it never actually earned out. So I don't know how you do that, how you keep a book in print for 20 years and still claim that it didn't make any money. That one you will find, that one you're going to have to hunt. You're going to have to hunt in Amazon, or you're going to have to hunt in used bookstores, because the Asimov estate eventually got control of those books and took them all out of print because they were diluting the Isaac Asimov brand. So,
interesting.
Yeah, the big book for me, I mean, the one you should find is, if you're going to look for one, Head Crash. This is there's hardcover trade paperback, mass market, U.S. mass market. I unfortunately had just found the box with all the foreign editions, and put it just out of camera reach here, so I can't get to it now. But
it's okay.
It's been. I mean, I run into people. I ran into a computer programmer, a C programmer from Siberia, and she was just, Ross Bethke. I'm not going to attempt to do her accent, but it was Ross Bethke, and pulls out the Russian edition. It was, wow, cool. This is great. So Head Crash is the one you should look for, and especially it's the one you should be looking for, because if all goes according to plan, we should have it out in ebook form just before Christmas.
Oh, good.
Well, it was
for me. That's how I like them. Yeah.
Well, it's the original publisher did not buy the electronic rights to the books. They just bought the rights to the print edition, and then they started putting chapters from the book up on their website. And my agent got a hold of them and said, you don't have the rights to do that, but we'll be happy to sell you the electronic rights. And this is in 1995, and they didn't think the electronic rights would actually be worth paying for, so they never bought the electronic rights. And so the book's been sitting there, in limbo ever since. But I have the electronic rights, so I have been resisting doing this for years. A lot of people go, wow, cool, Amazon Kindle. I'm going to be a publisher, and I'm going to publish all my crap and all those unsold stories and all those unsold manuscripts that I've been working on for years. And I made the decision when we launched Rampant Loon Press that I was not going to do that I was not going to turn this into a vanity operation. So I've been focused on finding new writers and publishing them. But now it's time to publish Head Crash, and we're going to be publishing the Actually, the title is Cyberpunk and Cyberpunk Revisited, which is the original short story, the novel that grew out of it that was never released, and a short memoir about what it's been like to spend the last 35 years being the guy who wrote Cyberpunk. So,
oh my goodness, I am so excited. This is such an awesome decision. Just me saying rah rah. I love it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was a difficult decision because I'm always more interested in the future than in what I did in the past. So
yeah,
but a lot of people are interested in my past, so I guess it's time to answer the questions.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming
thank
from.
you for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just delighted. So thank you. Okay, now with Stupefying Stories, how did that? Tell us a little more about that.
Way back in the 80s, I wrote a story for that wound up being published in Aboriginal. It was It Came from the Slush Pile, and it was kind of a comedy horror story about the giant pile of unsold manuscripts, or in a magazine editor's office, gaining sentience, becoming self-aware, and attacking. And so I needed a name for the magazine for the story. So astounding, amazing, fantastic, and I got down and went through the list of superlatives, and I got down to stupefying before I found one that had not been used for an actual magazine. So the name of the magazine for this story was Stupefying Stories. And years later, when I was running an online writing group and and coaching along a lot of bright new young writers who were trying to learn the chops and break into publishing, and I was hearing a lot of complaining from these people. I mean, these people are good. Some of these folks went on to some of them showed up on the short list for major awards, things like that. But a lot of them were complaining, how do we get published? How do we break into being published? And I thought, I can do this. I know how to do it. It was going to be a one-shot deal. And I'm going to put together an anthology, a best of from this writing workshop. And we were thinking, well, what do we call it? What the hell? Let's call it Stupefying Stories. We already paid for the logo and the artwork. Yeah. And to my surprise, it for a while, we had some problems here. Stupefying Stories, and that's stupefying with an E. Stupefying means to stun or astonish. Stupefying with an I means to make stupid. So.
It's the first one.
It's the first one. It's Stupefying Stories with an E. And, it actually grew really fast and grew out of control. And then we had to dial it back because we had some medical problems, serious problems in the family. And I had to dial back my commitment to it. But we are still alive, still here. We've been publishing it we're just about to start our 8th year now, and I'm still on the mission here to do for young up and coming writers what George Sithers and Charles Ryan did for me back in the 80s. These were George Sithers was the founding editor of Asimov's magazine, and Charles Ryan was the editor of Galileo and then Aboriginal. And these are the two editors who were polite enough to actually read everything I threw at them and send it back with, this is why this story doesn't work, And eventually I got to the point where I sent a story to George Sithers, who had left Asimov and moved to Amazing, and I sent it to him. and he sent it back with, it's not quite there yet, but I think if you just change this and this, it'll be acceptable. And that story was Cyberpunk. So that was my first major market commercially published short story.
Wow,
And
that's a good story.
so that's why I'm doing Stupefying Stories, is because I think I can do for new writers now what George and Charlie did for me, 30 years ago.
That's just wonderful. And on that topic, now I know Stupefying Stories, it encompasses more than cyberpunk, obviously, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
The whole range. And so
the whole range of fantastic fiction. And we even go out into some stuff that people go, that isn't fantastic. That's, that isn't fantasy. That isn't science fiction. That's no, it's, I go by George Sither's definitions. Science fiction is whatever I'm pointing at when I say that's science fiction. So
that's awesome. I'm going to need to use that. I like that logic. Yeah. So what types of cyberpunk, going back to cyberpunk now, what types do you feel are missing in the market? Or do you feel like there are any because you have a unique position and perspective, do you see any gaps?
I hate to confess this. This is sort of the same problem that the Nebula Awards have. When you're an actual working writer, you don't have the time to read everything that's everything else that's being published and make an intelligent decision. So you wind up kind of going, it's Norman Spinrad's turn to win an award this year. And the same thing happens when you're editing a magazine. You really don't have time to read much outside of what comes in the slush pile, in the unsolicited submissions. So I really have no sense of, I participate in the Cyberpunk Writers Facebook group, but I really don't read, I don't go out there and look for stuff that I don't easily find. Does that make sense? I don't go hang out at the bookstore going, ooh, look, I wonder what's on the racks today. It's another 37 novels about an angsty vampire, a surly werewolf, the beautiful young girl who can't decide between them and doesn't know she's a witch. And the cyborg ninja who's traveled back in time from the future to kill them all before they can breed, and how they must learn to love and respect each other in order to survive the zombie apocalypse. It's
no.
I used to tell people that when I used to, and I started getting editors go, "Wow, that's great! Can I be the first one to see it?"
You missed the point. Yeah. No, that's totally fine. Actually, I hear this a fair amount from different authors that they actually don't read either in their genre or, it's just down to time.
I read a lot, but, it's when I read for my own entertainment, it's downtime. And I really have a hard time reading science fiction now without reading it critically.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why I like thrillers, even though I write in this space. I like to escape into thrillers. Yeah.
I read a lot of history.
Yes, I read that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's always stranger and more absurd than anything you can make up. So.
Yeah. I love that. I agree.
The one thing I see, I do see a fair number of cyberpunk stories come in the in the unsolicited submissions. And in fact, we are putting together I don't want to call it cyberpunk. I probably will for marketing purposes, but I'm putting together a cyber theme book for release, possibly January, more likely February. But the criterion is these are the stories that have to impress me, and a lot of the stuff that I see that calls itself cyberpunk is they're doing a great job of recapitulating what the previous generation of writers did in 1985, but they aren't pushing anything new. They aren't coming up with new ideas. They're focusing on the noir and the punk aspect, and here this is me. This is I work for Crate. You have to get the computer science right to impress me.
Yeah.
A lot of these stories come in, and they got the punk attitude, and they got the noir setting, and the evil corporations being all corporation-y, but they wouldn't know which end of a hot soldering iron to hold. So.
And on that note, would you say that you prefer personally that people get into the nitty gritty? I'm going to assume yes, but the nitty gritty of the computational.
Well, no, you don't have to get into the nitty gritty of the computation. You just have to understand. This is engineering and science, not effing magic. And
nope, that's fair. I love it. Okay, so let's jump to our show phone line. For anyone listening who doesn't know, this is where I have a phone number. You can call in and just leave a message, or you can text. You can also leave messages on Twitter. So we have a phone line message.
Hello, this is Malcolm from Sacramento. Here we go. Do you feel cyberpunk loses relevance or popularity faster than other sci-fi genres? Now, the other question is, when you wrote Head Crash or other stories, was it tricky to decide how far in the future you would place it? Thank you.
Anybody who's trying to seriously predict the future when they write science fiction is really overthinking it. Science fiction is always, you're holding up a warped funhouse mirror to contemporary reality. And it's really hard to make a serious prediction, more than about 5 years out in any technology. And so cyberpunk, the punk, the attitude, that part stays relevant just because that's the nature of our species. This is how teenagers interact with people who are older than them. Cyberpunk, when it tries to get too accurate and technical, loses relevance very quickly, but then so does every other form of fiction or science fiction or whatever. I mean, I was reading, what was it? An Asimov story. I'm trying to remember the title of it. And it's one that he wrote in the 40s, and it's a really nice, great space adventure story. And he was really trying hard to be very serious about his mathematics and his astronomy in it. But to read it now, it's laughable because we know it doesn't work that way. Real space travel doesn't work anything like what he wrote in this story. And cyberpunk, part of the problem also is that cyberpunk is kind of a fashion. It's a statement, and punk goes in and out of style. So, all pop fiction is disposable. It's all ephemeral. We're writing, a short story is the equivalent of a hit single, for a musical artist. I mean, it's a rare one that has any relevance beyond the year it's out there. So yeah, cyberpunk goes out of fashion, goes out of style, but really no faster than any others. When I wrote the original story, I was thinking that this future that was the backstory that I was visualizing for the story was about 40 years out, because I was thinking, that well, this is in. I wrote it, wrote the first draft, the original story in 1980 when microcomputers were just coming on the market. The Apple IIs and the Radio Shack TRS-80s. IBM hadn't introduced the PC yet. Apple was still 4 years away from the Mac. And so I was seeing already that the kids, the younger they were when they got into the technology, the more quickly they absorbed it. And I was looking at the kids of that time and thinking, their children are going to be holy terrors. And so I figured, okay, so that puts this future about 40 years out. And that's how we wound up where we, I think I nailed that pretty accurately here. Although I was still expecting to have autonomous cars by now, and not flying cars. You wouldn't want flying cars, I mean, just look at the way people drive in 2 dimensions. If they do that in 3 dimensions, good God, we're all dead. So when I wrote Head Crash, that was 10 years out in the future. That seemed like a good safe distance to put it out where it could still be close enough to contemporary reality to be accessible, but far enough in the future to be kind of wiggy and weird and funny.
I think it's awesome. And everyone's always going to have their opinion about it. Mm-hmm. We do know Cyberpunk is, for anyone that is just checking out Cyberpunk and is absolutely new to all of this, it tends to be near future, but everyone defines what near is differently. So
yep. It tends to be near future. It tends to be dystopian. I don't know. It's a flavor. It's a taste. Yeah. It's always easier to write dystopias than utopias because, frankly, utopias are boring. So
yeah, I mean,
where's the conflict? Where's the story? Where's the yeah? Mm-hmm. It
has to be like the underbelly of it.
Right. We like our utopias with dirty secrets and seamy underbellies. It just makes it more interesting.
Well, yeah. Oh my goodness, there have been so many awesome takeaways in speaking with you, Bruce, and I'm going to sneak in one last question.
Sure.
A highly personal one. Not like personal, but so I hate drones. I think it's even more than the privacy issue. It's just when I'm out in nature, I'm starting to see them everywhere. And it's like, so how do I get over this? How do I get over my angst? Since all of this is probably inevitable.
No. You're quite right to be, fearful of drones. Well, just think about it. You've got all these people flying all these drones out there with all these little, GoPro cameras or whatever on them, and they're streaming this video over the internet. So, I really don't like. This is awkward to say this, given who I work for and who our single biggest customer is, who I can never, who the initials of the agency, I am not allowed to say out loud, but I really hate, the surveillance society, the cameras everywhere, the open microphones everywhere, and the drones are just taking that into the third dimension. Now they have mobility, and you're going to have privacy will become very, very rare commodity and probably very expensive. So no, I think you're quite right to be at least annoyed by drones and possibly fearful of them. Probably next time you see a drone, just go, Paul.
I need to. I've kind of had it.
It is tempting. So no, you will see more drones, and it's not just aerial drones. The folks who the friends of mine who went into robotics. One of my college roommates, his software is crawling around on the surface of Mars, and that's really cool. But I don't like the idea that, that same technology will eventually move into corporate and government functions and be crawling around, in your lawn and in your sewers. So,
yeah, I think for me, it's also a consent issue. It's a problem if people don't know they're being recorded and all that. Yeah. But really, on a functional level, it really comes down to nature for me. I'm so tired of not being able to have a place to escape. So,
well, at some point, there's going to be a conflict between the recreational drone operators and the Fish and Wildlife Service. Once you start getting endangered species taken out by clumsy drone operators, something's going to have to happen.
Yeah, let's keep our faith in the collective ability to get some safeguards in place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think drone automobiles will be great just because I think most people drive like idiots. And I think I really look forward to the advent of drones big enough to carry people. So, instead of getting in a cab, I can just get in a drone and fly over the traffic. So that would be what makes flying cars workable is, if there are no human piloted flying cars.
Well, thank you so much, because
my pleasure.
I have really enjoyed this. And as you point us in the right direction, where should we go to find out more, or where can anyone go to get involved with your work?
The best place to go is stupefyingstories.com. There's everything that we're doing goes up on that website, and it's a lot of activity there. So there's new fiction, there's book releases, and there's this little thing we call the Friday Challenge, which is somewhere between a writing contest and a writing workshop. And that's the place to go, stupefyingstories.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
My pleasure. And thank you very much for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Get involved with some of my productivity essays and other productivity tools, suggestions. I have an app of the week, all kinds of things over at theproductiveauthor.com. Again, it's wonderful to have you here, and please visit storypunks.world to learn more and to get involved.